You are now tuned in to another episode of HipHopHedz. I am Know Sage along with Novek, and we love to discuss our favorite hip hop moments. This time we brought a special guest, Dave, my man, my man with the jump shot, my man from the 3-point range. Welcome to the
What's
show.
going on? What's good? What's good? Happy to be here.
Love it, love it. Yeah, we're gonna dive into the topic in just a moment, but I would love to plug your IG handle because you got some travels on there. You got your shoe game is on point as you be posting.
Yeah, definitely. Like shoe gaming since the longest. Previously we were just talking sport, but like Jordan to me the GOAT. So it's always about the shoes. So definitely that traveling, of course. So I could definitely like send that out. And you mentioned we went out to Memphis, Nashville, had a nice road trip. I haven't posted that. I even haven't posted like some Europe trips from like last year. So that's still pending. But yeah, my handle is aim_high 23 HIGH. So that's something that came up just because that's all we should be aiming for, aiming high. So and then that 23, because that's all he did whenever he went up. So
Which 23?
Chicago 23.
He's 6 now. He's 6 losses.
Yes, sir. MJ all the way. I respect that. So yeah, follow Dave at aim_high 23. You know what it is, you know what time it is. And yeah, man, like speaking of the road trips, this topic came up for me. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while because we were like playing some tunes. Everybody took turns, casting their phone or whatnot. And then once the phone came to your direction, you started playing some Tupac. And then I wanted you to share this story because like I feel like the Tupac conversation is kind of hard to approach because you could obviously approach in a lot of different ways, like what hasn't been said about the GOAT of the West Coast, arguably. Like, we'll probably get into it. Like, is he still alive? What's the best song? Like, like constant conversations. What's the best movie? But I was really pulled into when you said that you bought the Thug Life album, Volume 1. Can you say a word about that? Because I remember, I think you said you bought it on CD. Like, I think when you sort of didn't know what Tupac was about, I think at that time.
Well, at that time I did, and like prior to that, like one thing about like Tupac is that like exactly what he talked about as far as like the later Tupac, and just like the like the thuggish of it, like kind of just the streets, like like what's going on. And me kind of like just being like first generation Mexican American and kind of like just growing up in that sort of like neighborhood that you're hearing gunshots and things like that, having to move out of there and just certain situations and the killings, like close by like North and Pulaski at the time in the early 90s through like 96. So, like we would have to like walk around, like things would happen. I was 6, 7 years old. I had like someone just go to my mom with a knife to her like the neck, like for a chain, and luckily she screamed and like the guy ran off, but like just, that's trauma. Like that's 7, 8 years old seeing something like that, so I'm against all these things. That's what he's talking about. So like to me, Tupac was just like, that's what he's about. Like, that's not what I like. So, like I'm good, but like that's at a younger age. And then once I started kind of like realizing how like that's exactly what he's talking about, like because no one's doing anything about it. And like that's what he had his own experiences on as well. So like to me, I started realizing that's what he was about. He was just about preaching. Like he was just pretty much talking about the things that are happening that only like certain like people can see, but nobody else is doing anything about. So like it was actually like my friend and I bought 2 CDs. It was Thug Life and Still I Rise. And it was between us, like on which one are you going to keep? And to me, I listened to Thug Life. I'm like, I'm keeping Thug Life, like just like the whole like album and just like what it was like messaging, just like the beats, the flow, like just the lyrics. And like, even with the team he was on, like it was just jam after jam after jam. And like, I just fell in love with the album. And like, that's something that kind of like just stuck out to me, and started like just pulling up everything and like just looking him up at the time, like downloading his music, that's, like in the beginning of like kind of like internet with like the AOL and stuff, the LiveWire, and like just pulling up like just downloads. And that's kind of like what it was about. Like Thug Life became like that one first album that like I listened to, and it was just packed with like exactly what's going on and what anyone can experience, gang related or not. And that's exactly what it is, like just a life form of the streets, and what like the experiences, the homes, like just all the things that, like people don't really talk about like in that sort of way, especially the way he did it in that album, which was like different. And we were talking about this. I was like different from like his albums before. So that's kind of like what stuck out like with this album to me. And like, and just being my first album, it was just like the perfect first album. And to me, like one of my favorites for sure of his.
Bro, so I just loved everything you just said, because like every topic you kind of just dropped could easily be a podcast conversation. But I want to just fast forward quickly to Thug Life Volume 1, because it came out in 94. And when you shared that story with me on our road trips, like one, I thought it was kind of interesting that you started playing Pac and you weren't playing like the Lils or the tattoo face rappers or the Mumbles. And I'm like, man, my man is the youngest in our squad and he's going straight, straight for like one of the greatest. And I think your relationship with Tupac is like very familiar to a lot of people. Like I think me growing up with 90s hip hop, I was starting sort of trying to fight the Pac sound. And then it kind of finally engrossed me. And, like the whole East Coast, West Coast thing at the time, you almost had to not like Pac. But once you dived into his knowledge and, like behind everything else, like you talking about Thug Life Volume 1, like I think when I finally became a fan, that was the album for me that turned it around, because for one, it only had 10 tracks on it, which I unfairly was trying to pair it up with like Nas Illmatic only having 10 tracks, right? So like there you go, like with the whole like the greatest albums of all time don't even need more than 10 tracks to say it. But then two, I was secretly trying to like, this is sort of like the Wu-Tang of the West for me, because like since Wu-Tang was my entry point, like Pac used this group as a platform. It wasn't just him. Like everybody had their own flow, everybody had their own style and their voice and their tenor. So I thought that was like super dope in itself. And then I just wanted to read this quote really quick from soulandstereo.com. They ranked 10 Tupac albums and Thug Life Volume 1 was 4 on their list. And they basically said, some of you may have never heard of this album, and Thug Life was a short-lived group comprised of Pac, frequent collaborator Big Psych, the Rated R, Macadocious, and Pac's stepbrother Mo Preem. Pac may be at his rawest on this LP, which features strong production outside of Me Against the World, which is honestly my favorite album, if I'm going to be honest. And then All Eyes on Me. I strongly consider ranking this album above All Eyes on Me, but that album slightly edges this one due to the sonic diversity. But don't sleep. If you haven't heard this one, track it down. It's by far Pac's most underrated effort. So yeah, like I stepped away from that quote and I was like, yeah, definitely Me Against the World album is definitely the one that I gravitate, and that's my favorite. But I feel like Thug Life is objectionably like his masterpiece, like in my eyes.
It's 42 minutes of just straight. He's chilling. That whole album is the Thug Life album. You get into Cradle to the Grave. You get into Pour Out a Little Liquor. You get early Nate Dogg on that as well. Bass. You got Nate's raspy voice on that. It's nice, and the producers on that. To me, this album ranks like either 1 or 2. Apocalypse. Basically, to me, is that hidden gem, because you got Jam Master Jay did the production on that album. You got Special Ed did production on Tupacalypse. You got a lot. You got DJ Bobcat. You got a lot of different DJs that don't sound like Tupac working on that album. Jam Master Jay did a lot of work that nobody knew about. It's crazy, but I would say Thug Life. It's the best car music out there. And when you're in the car and you put this on, and it just flows, because nobody knew who this was. You'd be like, that's Tupac and a bunch of dudes did an album together. The way they dropped Thug Life was he showed up out of nowhere in 94. it just popped up. Because I remember it dropped, we were looking for Me Against the World, or no, Me Against the World came out right after that, I believe. And it's just, it's tight the way Pac did it, because Me Against the World, he was locked up. When Me Against the World came up, he was in jail. So it sounded like a Tupac album that was done before he went to jail. It had a different sound to it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of like how you said, Apocalypse Now, like listening to that album was like very political. He has a whole different flow. He has like that, like also that political, like kind of like influential, like like hip hop-ish like flow, like the ethical of it, like what's kind of like expected at the time, especially like in the early 90s, and coming off that like like that hip hop that he's kind of like accustomed to. And then with what he's trying to say, his message, his lyrics, and even his next album, like it was just all political, and he had like just so many jams. He has Ice Cube on there, and like you said, just like the people that are on there as well. But it was just like a whole different, like Tupac, the way his like flows were. And that's kind of like what stuck out, where like that's what like we were talking about, Jason, how like with Thug Life being that next, like in between the next following like individual album, and like packed with like the people that he was, and just how he transcended this. It was like a whole like figuring out who I am, like kind of like just like disrupting to like this whole, like, this is my character, this is who I am. And then he says it on this album, I wasn't raised this way, I was made this way, the streets made me this way, like, I wasn't born this way, I was raised this way, like, and that's kind of like comes about, like, you kind of like get raised into a certain way with like how you're living up, like what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, like, with like all those things. Like this was just transcending into a whole other level, which became the next Tupac version, like his true version on kind of like just almost kind of like just not giving like a fuck anymore, like at this point, but he's still being political. He's still being like who he really was, never really losing sight, but in a way, kind of like figuring all things out, because he would want life to be a certain way, but it is not that way. You're kind of like being like shoveled into like a whole like grave pit pretty much, and you got to kind of like pull yourself through. You got to like, and he like little, because we've been talking about this, I get all these Instagrams on quotes and things, and he's always talking about it, like, like I'm not gonna lose myself, I'm gonna keep faith, like good or bad. And like he was always trying to like figure like what's next, and like he was always thinking ahead.
Well, you think about, now you got me thinking, because because Thug Life goes into the Me Against the World mentality. It's the transition album, because To Apocalypse Now, it had it had an East Coast vibe, but a West Coast feel to it. When Brenda's Got a Baby and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Tupac had 3 different careers. I always joke about that. It was political activist Tupac. It was party Tupac, where he's hanging out with Digital Underground and Shock G and the rest of them. And he had that party vibe to him, because remember, I Get Around was dropped, and then you had he did a couple of tracks with Digital Underground, and then he came back out of jail, and it was Me Against the World. And then we go into the other albums, basically. I mean, All Eyes on Me, I mean, it was a darker Pac. I think that he started off being politically correct, and then he changed. This is the same guy that said, dear mama, then he turned around and said, F your mama. so I'm trying, like, I'm listening I love that creative range. You got to be able to say, I love my mama, but F your mama. You got that's the Tupac. That's the I always call it the intrigue of Tupac at this point, to be honest with you. It's very intriguing, because he's the most bipolar rapper of all time.
And it's funny you say that, because like you said, like the Thug Life was a transition, and that's kind of like where I mean the transition into like the darker, or like who became after, kind of like just after, like who the different flow that he was before. And like I remember just like watching this kind of like, there's a documentary of him being like 17 years old, like just this sweet kid, like from like my mama, like from like trying to do good. I can't even say the B word. And that's kind of like how I grew up. And that's when I started realizing, when I started seeing these things like as a teenager myself, like that's kind of like how I am now in a way, because I'm trying to do good, like I'm a firstborn. My mom was 16 when she had me, like we're very close, like like I grew up with like everything that she taught me, like, you know, everything that she's about, being a gentleman, you know, like, don't do this, don't do that. You see what your dad's doing, like, you know, no, like, I want to treat you good, you know, like, I want to be good to women. So that's kind of like the persona that he had. And it's funny because there's like this quick clip on, like, you know, like, I can't even say the B word. And then you got a next clip of him like years later, be this, be that, FUB. So you're like, just like you said, like, just kind of like that whole switch, almost like that bipolar, where he could like be just spitting at a camera or like just, you know, just kind of like clashing out, and then having a formal interview with someone very educated, very formal, very knowledgeable, like very presentable, like, you know, like that's just like the Tupac was. Like, he just, that's who he really was. But then he was just kind of like made, and he was lashing to this whole, like, how you say, either bipolar, just lashing to this other character that was being brought out. Like, he was almost like fed up, and there was like that darker him.
Yeah, it's very dark, but you know, it started in '94. Above the Rim, when he played that character, and don't forget Juice, when he played these characters, I think, like, they always say life imitates art. I think he transformed. You know, it started with Juice, Bishop, when he became Bishop, and everybody was like, because everybody loved that character because, you know, Bishop was dark, man. Bishop is what Pac turned into prior to death. Before Bishop, he was a different world, Pac. You know, the TV show A Different World, he's showing up on college campuses, chasing Jada Pickett, but you know, which translates to Will Smith having problems today. You know?
Yeah, and that was like, you know, that was like you said, like the Tupac, like that artistic, because like he was very artistic. He grew up being artistic and like soft spoken, but like just like straightforward and very knowledgeable at a young age. So like you're very right, just the way like who he was before.
Yeah.
You know, the thing I think is interesting is that when Thug Life Volume 1 came out, I think he gave that acronym Thug a meaning. And I think Dave, you sent me like an IG post about this. So I think it's kind of cool that, you know, like fans are still finding a way to keep him relevant, to sharing his, you know, his knowledge and sharing his gems. But what he turned the Thug acronym into, what was it? That the hate you give little infants fucks everybody, right? So it's kind of like it's
a lot of people don't know that, like, even kind of like just, you know, the N-word, he was like never ignorant, getting goals accomplished. Like, you know, that was his mentality. And he always like fought, like, you know, like what's better than like an educated Black man, you know, like that's more powerful. Like he would pride that, like, you know, like get educated, be knowledgeable, like fuel yourself. Like you need to feed yourself. And that's something that he like, people don't see that, like in like Me Against the World, even the Genius asks questions, like how is he feeding himself? Like, you know, yeah, he was in jail during that time, but he was also educating himself, educating his mind, to his mind. And it is what it is with all these visionaries, just becoming more powerful with more information that you know. So that's kind of like something impactful that Tupac was for me. And like people don't realize that that's who he really was, trying to like, you know, explain like within his music, outside of like everything that like is happening in the streets and like just partying and liquor and, you know, things like that. But Me Against the World was another album too, but like that Thug Life was just that whole transition and just that beginning of that whole dark, and then just like all the lyrics, and like he would just talk about things that I would see, you know, one of these days I'll learn, don't fuck with trick ass people because they turn into, you know, like, so things like that, like, you know, like, and you get to see that sometimes where you feel like you got your friends or they'll back you up. Like at the times when you need most, you know, you realize who are your friends, who's really there for you. And he was explaining that in this album with everything that was going on. So.
Well, you know, you get into the maturity aspect right now. You get into like that time period, you know, around 96, you fast forward a little bit toward before death and the Biggie drama, and you get into it, and they were boys. You know, I remember the first time hearing them on the track together. You probably remember that Know Sage, hearing Biggie and Pac on the track, and you're like, wow. And they complimented each other, and they performed a lot together in different concerts and different venues. But I think what happened basically is that ultimately, you know, that success went everybody's head. I think those two guys grew apart and they never found each other again. And it changed hip hop, you know, in the process in that situation. Because Pot definitely changed hip hop. You know, he became the man, you know, this is the same guy I could talk about Hit 'Em Up and then he did Toss 'Em Up. There was Hit 'Em Up and Toss 'Em Up. And you think about that, basically, he had a party, he had a lot of party tracks. He went to California. When he went back to California the second time, he was so different. California Love, and we saw Pac in California Love, we were like, this dude got that energy. His energy was so different in California Love compared to the other albums. He's at the height of his powers at that point.
That's true. That's a good call, because like, like kind of like just personas has a lot to do like where he was at too, like born in New York, growing up in Baltimore. And then like he says, and like where people figure like he was probably born in like LA or like in California, it's just like where he kind of like found himself. And like you said, like kind of like found that persona that like with California Love and just like that whole like To Live and Die in LA, like those kind of songs like that was just kind of like to him is like, this is where I found myself, my persona, like this is where my identity came. Like, yeah, I love New York. I was, like going back to like going to school in Baltimore, that's where he got his whole artistic side and all, but like just like that California vibe was like what it was for him. And that kind of like just transcended his music as well, as like you see like with the later albums. But like with that Thug Life is what like stuck out with like that persona. And like people think back, like you said, the first few albums like that New York like style, until like he found his like, look, hey, this is what I want to do, this is me. And that's when he just took off with that character.
And Dave, like even you buying the album on CD, like that just stirs so many memories for me in my mind. At your age, still being able to buy it at that time when you did. Like, I would imagine all the finger pointing critics looking at that album cover, seeing the word thug on it, and just like ignorantly thinking, all right, well, here we go, just some ignorant bullshit, right? And then even just like Pac being tatted up with Thug Life too, right? But then just him turning that word into an acronym is just like a metaphor of just how he always lived, right? It's like, don't just look at that, like look beneath the surface and actually understand what I'm trying to shoot, like what I'm trying to broadcast to you and what I'm trying to actually tell you. It's not just about what you see on the surface, right?
Yeah, it's about what like, like you don't see that these kids are going through, what these kids are seeing, like, like they're like, being left out, like where like you feel like you can't grow or get out of like, whatever you're going through. So like kind of like this was album like where like, with this acronym, like this is what y'all doing and this is what's going on. But then kind of like turning it into like this whole like outspoken, because every song in that, like, comes like you said, Burn Me a G. Like one of my favorite ones, to be honest, is like Under Pressure. Under Pressure is like one of my favorite ones that I could like relate to the most. Because like, even like towards like where he takes off on his second verse, Running Wild, I never smiled as a juvenile. Even now I get a frown when I come around. Like just like the way he took off at the end, like that's a sick flow. Like that's just him going off, like, like, and yeah, later on he becomes like poetic and stuff like that, the way he kind of like does his music. But with that one, he was just like straight flowing. Like that was just right, like kind of just going with it and taking off. And then with those beats, like it was just like you could relate to that a lot on what he was trying to say, on the message he was like sending with that.
I love that you referenced that track because yeah, honestly, every track on there bangs, everything slaps, in my opinion. Like obviously the singles that everyone knows that Novek was just talking about earlier are the ones that are most prominent. And I sometimes forget that Pac can flow, like even like on All Eyes on Me when he was rapping with Method Man, like he can spit with the best of them. But
yes,
in my mind, I always think about when he goes with the cadence. So I'm gonna spit this little bit from Pour Out a Little Liquor. Y'all know what I'm talking about. We basically like, but since a bitch can't be trusted, ho snitch to the police. So I mean, it's like you always think about that, like that Pac like accent whenever he wants to like.
Yeah, now homie's busted. Like
yeah.
kind of like, and then like a storytelling too. But like yeah, like you said, it's like flowing. And like we did bring up that all like that track. Like look, like this is like that like that whole like he could like reference and like these metaphors, like he could go with it, but he's just finding himself and this is who he is. But like when it comes to like that hip hop vibe, like, he could throw down he could definitely pull his little like, and like you mentioned, like with Biggie, they were supposed to work on an album. Was that song you were talking about, Running from the Police, that they created together? Like they both went off. It was just like they were probably like, we like, yo, like let's make an album like that. Who would have known how that would have came up? But that song, like, I know later on they made a new track of it, but I remember listening to the original, like they just both went well together with their different personas and the different flows. Like they were like freestyle, like, and like Tupac would freestyle and he'll get very creative. Like, so like people don't realize how like he had a flow himself as well. He wasn't just like poetically, like just trying to like, with rhymes, because that's what he really was as well, because like whenever he was writing, whenever he would express it, like, it was like in that poetic like feel, like where like, he's feeling his music.
Well, he's feeling the music, and then you think about his cadence and his delivery changes.
Yep.
Based on who he rapping with. Now you think about like he rapped with Digital Underground. He had like this really slick, laid back flow. We didn't get the I call it the Martin Luther King anthem when Pac made that voice. Running from the police, and you're just like you look around like you think it's a Baptist minister and just took the mic. So Pac projects his voice behind you. And I remember the first time we were in the dorm back in college, Jason, and we were listening to something, and he made that sound. And I looked around the room like, is he in the room with us? It's like, Dave Chappelle makes fun of it. Like, you're at a party and you hear Tupac say something on the radio. I shot a man 4 times last week and on CNN. You're like, did that happen last week? Tupac was gone for 5 years, but his his style, like the track used to get me the most with Pac when we were in college was Violent off Tupac list. Now that track, if you ever listen to the lyrics of that track, he's talking about police brutality, on the first album out. The first album was like a message to like, America, this is what I won't tolerate. And and then he softened up a little bit, then he went party, then he went dark again, then he went making fun of people. When Pac is at his best, when he's got somebody that's, when he challenges somebody, or somebody says something about him he doesn't like. He's the best, I don't want to say battle rapper. He's the best response rapper of all time. You don't want to start that because he's going to keep writing until he gets it right.
That's true. And like, just like straightforward. You're right. Because like with this political, with like violent, and like what I would do back, how I would retaliate. It's kind of like the message to America was like, okay, like this is what he's telling, kids to do. Like, he's telling to do this to the cops, to shoot the, but like, no, like, but like, this is what happens when people are fed up, like that Malcolm X, like where like people get tired, they want to retaliate, like, and like, this is what's only creating in our minds because I'm tired of it, like, and like, we're not going to tolerate it, like you said. And that's what he was like more about within like those 2 albums. Like, that's exactly what he was expressing with that kind of like, like violence against like the police or like whatever, like, even sometimes even the government, because like, that's what like he would say, the cops are the biggest gang like in America.
So Novak, you were dropping some of the lead tracks off of Thug Life Volume 1, and then you did mention Nate Dogg. Like, I feel like whenever I'm listening to hip hop jams and I'm trying to like sing like the best of them, I feel like I try to channel either John Legend or Nate Dogg. And it's like Nate Dogg's voice is just so iconic. And he's like another one that's like, what if he was still around? What awesome dope tracks would be still happening? It's like, it's kind of awesome that he was on this album at all. And I forgot that even Warren G produced one of the beats on this album too. So it's kind of like a nice moment in rap that kind of shows, like you were calling it a turning point. Like, it definitely was like a turning point for a lot of artists and not just Tupac.
It's with you're right with Thug Life, with Nate Dogg, and Nate Dogg established himself as the voice of the voice of South Central at that point, the voice of the West. He's the West's whole. He's the singer for the West. I mean, Danny Boy tried to do that, as he came onto the death row scene or whatever, but Danny Boy is from Chicago, so that was more of a Midwest slang compared to somebody riding around in a 6'4", looking out the window, singing, looking at palm trees. I mean, Nate was the West Coast. You think about that. You put Pac with him, the storytelling went to a different level. because now he's singing about it as Pac's rapping about it. So they created a whole the whole visual got 720 at that point, not a 360. It wrapped around that track and made it even better. You think about the show soundtrack. You remember the show soundtrack? And, you think about that whole style. The show soundtrack is very Pac-like when it opens up on the show. Think about it. You had the D.A.K.A, you had everything on there. You had Warren G. No, we forgot about Warren G. So Warren G also got a lot of history with Pac as well, producer-wise.
Mm-hmm.
He helped Warren G find his voice. You think about Regulators. Regulators, to me, no matter what you say about it, I was just waiting for Pac to pop up on Regulators back in the day. I was like, man, you imagine Pac showing up at the hotel and finishing the verse? Because it had that St. Ives vibe to it. You remember the St. Ives commercial with Pac? And Regulators has that vibe, man. That Pac had the greatest commercial for malt liquor ever.
Bro, you know what's kind of hilarious about, so when you bring up Warren G, at that time, I had that CD.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember how much I love that album. Like the album CD cover was like crystal clear, and you saw like the Warren G album, kind of like the palm trees in the CD cover. But anyhow, like that album had nonstop replays from me at that time. Like I must have heard like hundreds of times. No Pac guest appearance on it, but like it's kind of hilarious. Like now, as much as I love that album at the time, I don't consider Warren G like an amazing lyricist by any stretch of the imagination. When I went and revisited that album, in fact, I was like, man, like he's repeating a lot of the same words, so he's not coming with the bars. So it's still fun, but like Pac is just like that timeless like rap, like God in a lot of ways. It's just kind of like, it's a complicated relationship, but once you understand it and what it means to you, like you definitely have to kind of like spread the word about him.
No, you're right about that. I mean, that Regulate, that album, that Warren G album, it was missing something. It was missing the lyrics. The beats and the production are outstanding. You think about the DJ track is ridiculous. You listen to it in the car. I mean, and that album, that Warren G album transitions into the show album. That same vibe carried to the show. And so, Warren was on top of the universe for like 5 minutes, and then, once the 5 minutes ran out, we went back to Pac, for a minute here, basically, before, things were developing over time.
Yeah, and Dave, I'm not sure if you ever heard the show soundtrack, but I love that Novek is bringing this up because he's brought this up on previous episodes before of our podcast. And the show movie, was like a live performance documentary of sorts, but it's interesting because it's like, it's a 90s album that has the greats doing it, but the album is a showcase of both East and West Coast rap, right? It's like at that time you're supposed to like love one or the other, but it was kind of cool when you had these moments where it was okay to love both. And like, there's a lot of great songs on that album that's from both like East and West Coast.
Yeah, Pac's on the album, don't forget Pac's on the show, is My Block on the show.
Yeah.
We had just Bone Thugs and Harmony on the show too. And they had a track with Pac, oh man, that collaboration was just, the first time I heard it, I was driving somewhere. I was like, the gunshots. I'm like, I'm in the city driving around. And and Pac's creating like that gothic like vibe, like talking about, to be born in pain. And you're looking around just like, man, is he going through it? Because he had passed away. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the hardest Tupac verse ever. The way he opens up with Bone, man, he destroyed them. All they could do is harmonize at that point. So, you can't top that. I mean, Biggie did the same thing to them. You think about, Bone had to just stand back and just turn into a barbershop quartet after that. Both 2 times. The 2 greats blessed them 2 times.
And those 2 were the ones to do it. Like, and that's kind of like something we were talking about, how like even the What, Biggie with Method Man, and then the What, and like he like they went that the What, like, and Method Man and Biggie, like that collab, and then like someone else to do it. We were just talking about like Tupac with Method Man when he actually showed his like hip hop like flow style that he could do it too, and then like they both did it with Bone Thugs and Harmony. like, you know, and then like you said, like they both times, like just like pulled it off. Like Tupac, like when I first heard that song, like you said, you know, with the gunshots and everything, and just feeling it, and just like the anger, and then like just it went off, you know, like just on his flow, like he just kind of like killed it. And Biggie did the same thing, you know, how Biggie could like also like have that freestyle style, especially with that beat.
Yo, speaking
Yeah.
of the what, I think I'm looking this up, but I thought Easy Mo B produced that. And to tie it back to Thug Life, there was an Easy Mo beat on the Thug Life Volume 1 album, right? So it's kind of like ironic, like Novak was talking about, you know, Pac using a lot of the East Coast sound for prior albums, but sort of like adopting the West Coast, you know, mindset and mentality moving forward from Thug Life, you know? So it's I don't know, it's very interesting that he's still dipping into the East Coast well, even though he's, you know, fully immersed himself into the West Coast life. West Coast, baby.
You talk Easy Mo B. Now think about that. He's bad boy. Easy Mo B was bad boy for a while. You know, you think it, you know about the beef and everything like that, the studio, the robbery and everything like that. You know, and he thought Big set him up in the studio, and Easy Mo B was doing most of the work for him at that point in time. I mean, it's man, you know, you really opening up some really interesting conversation pieces right now, because Easy Mo B, man, was straight balling. It's a West Coast track with an East Coast producer. He
Straight
had
ball in.
he was more West Coast than he was East Coast at that point. And that track is so fluid. You know, the imagery, he's riding around, he's F the police, he's doing, he's doing every Pac thing. That was the beginning
That's
of
a
the Pac.
cruise song. You just
Hmm.
cruise to it and feel it.
It is, man. It's probably one of the greatest, man. That track, that's a hard 5 minutes. You know, it's smooth.
The whole time, just like you know, just going back to like the beat itself, you know, like that's definitely a 5 minute packed song. Like it's just all throughout, like from start to finish.
Yeah, you think about that, then you think about, you know, straight balling, and then you think about parties and bullshit with Big. That's Easy Mo B track. The that flow continues, you know, because you could tell. I think a lot of that competition between Pac and Big was generated because they touched the same producers. You think about it. You know, Easy Mo B did a lot of work for those guys. So they had to be in the studio a lot around each other at the same time. You know, and Puff probably saw it and felt it and said, we need to lock Easy Mo B down. No more hanging out with Death Row. And so, you know, but that sound is just timeless, man. Timeless. I mean, he definitely needs to get, Easy Mo B definitely needs to get his flowers. That's one guy we don't really give no respect to a production level, but he's definitely earned his flowers.
No, yeah, I totally respect Easy Mo B. Yeah, he definitely is like an unsung hero for production. And he also did, I mean, he did like countless tracks, but didn't he do Flavor in Your Ear for the Craig Mack song, right?
That remix.
Right.
Yeah, you know, it's ridiculous. Don't forget how they brought Buster into that track. I always wanted a Pac and Buster song. You imagine that energy?
Yeah, as weird as it sounds, like Pac would find a way to make it work. Obviously, Busted too, but it's like I saw this one live performance years ago. It must have been sort of like an unplugged MTV or VH1 thing, and it was of Pac. And I forget, it was like very stripped down. It might have literally been either just a piano or a guitar or just one instrument, but somehow Pac made it work. There was like candles in the background. It was very dimly lit. I'm like, this sounds very cringeworthy. How would Pac even like make this performance work? But he always shines. Like he always figure out a way to make it work. Like whether it became to the acting, you know, to the activism, and obviously the music, you know.
Yeah, even upbeat. Like if you give him like an upbeat, like he'll definitely give a flow that could kind of like just keep going and then just like rhyme with it. Cause like he was just about that. Like he could write. So like he could rhyme, like, you know, like, and then he would kind of like just throw a flow that like, and that's kind of like how like it felt a little bit with like Under Pressure. And then like just kind of like he could definitely like upbeat and then just kind of like throw a flow with it, like just consistently and like keep up with the best of them. Like he finds a way. Because like to him, it's like he would always even say like, throw me a beat, give me a beat. He would just think of kind of like just like what he wanted to talk about, think about the name of the song. Okay, that's gonna be the name of the song, you know, like, and then just throw down and then just get creative. Like that's the mind that he had. Like when it was just a beat sometimes, like he would, once he felt it, it was over, you know, like he would just kind of like just find a way to like make it happen.
Well, I mean, there's this one time though, I questioned what the hell I was listening to. That what's your phone number? Track off of All Eyes on Me. You know, that song, that's the only song I cringed a little bit at off of All Eyes on Me. Because you know, when you went through I Ain't Mad at You and all the rest of those tracks, and then what's your phone number comes on, you're thinking like, okay, Pac, you know, why did this make the album? Because he was on the road, man. Ambitious as a rider, man. He opens up All Eyes on Me just on fire. And then, you know, All About You, he took the fire out a little bit, let it sizzle a little bit. And then, you know, he came back and got my mind made that you know, that Method Man track with Corrupt and everybody. That beat is a sick 360. It's almost like it's like they're ciphering No Sage at that point. They're standing around, you know, they're around. I imagine them around like a burning garbage can, just rapping and telling stories, man. I wish I got my mind made up, had a video. That video would have been an open cipher, but just artists spitting pretty much.
That'd have been amazing. I love that you referenced the All Eyes on Me tracks, because like it was a double CD, right? So it was at the time, if you didn't come out with a double CD, whether every track was banging or not, like you still had to do it. It was like it was like a hip hop toll road. You better pay it. You better do it. Yeah, Dave, I think we're sort of running short on time with you, but did you have any other like sort of final thoughts on the Pac legacy, or you know, your favorite Pac memories, and you know, just anything in general?
Yeah, I mean, like talking about like All Eyes on Me, like just like listening to him more, like Can't See Me was one that stood out for me. It was a banger, like that album in general, like you said, just like he could like go from like one beat to another and kind of like find a way to do it. And that's another album that stands out. Me Against the World's another one, but like with Thug Life, kind of like just was just like kind of like to me that whole like change of him and just the whole 10 album, like the 10 songs, it was just something that stood out to me. And like he continues to like send a message in this and to this day. Like for example, something that we talked about like back in September, I was out in like Naples, and I took a train out to Pompeii. I was gonna go see the ruins, and like out of nowhere, like I had to like double look. Like here is like a young kid from Pompeii wearing a Tupac shirt, like just like, you know, like repping, like if he's listening to his album right now, got his AirPods on, I'm like, no way. And then kind of like just zooming in, like taking a picture of that, like just like the way like Tupac till this day is being influential, like the realist to me, like one of the realists, like whether like a lot of it was more so of like trying to like relate on what people go through and like what is going on. Like he's still like sending a message to this day, like the most influential that I know, impactful. Like for a while, like I wasn't listening to him as much, and then lately just kind of like recollecting and everything coming back, like it just reminded me of how like why like Tupac is one of the realists. And he said it, and he would say continuously, like I'm not gonna stop until I die, like and he definitely like did like change into a whole darker persona that like led up to like his death pretty much. Or maybe he's still alive, who knows, because with all the now, but he was kind of like a studio fiend. Like that's all he did. Like he could just like smoke a blunt, like have some Hennessy, and just be in the studio all day, like just writing and just making music. So that's without a doubt for sure. Like that was his ambition at the same time. And one of you guys mentioned like how he pretty much had like 3 different careers going on. To be able to manage through that like at a young age, and like be also in the industry of like making like, you know, movies and stuff. And he was becoming better and better on that. Like as you see him like progress even in like his acting skills, like he was just doing it. He was doing a lot, and like at a very young age. And there's a lot to do. And that's something that he's like, he died pretty much just trying to do and give the best persona. And he sent out so much, like by 25 or so, like 11 albums or so. Like that's very, very impressive. And for him to like still be to this day influential all around the world, and Pompeii out in like Italy, you know, like this kid, like who would have thought, you know, like it's just very, very like fascinating to see for sure.
Yeah, I love all those vibes and feels, and yes, like the graphic tees of Pac will never die. The TikTok IG stories, the Machiavelli albums. We must be on Machiavelli album number 100 at this point. I lost track. I mean, like I unfairly always try to like frame hip hop in like what's the best album that you can produce, right? Because I look at it like a tapestry or a project. So like Me Against the World, I admit it was my favorite album, and I think it was a chance for Pac to like stop being too extra, stop with his demeanor, his straight bowling, you know what I'm saying? So it's like like Novak said, he was locked up. Machiavelli 1, I think that's arguably an awesome album front to back, but like who knows what was done while he was still alive? Who knows if he even had a hand of it to even craft that album? And then like, yeah, finally, like again, Thug Life Volume 1, like I definitely like challenge you to listen to this album front to back and not be like amazed. Like even everybody that's featured on the album, if it gives Pac a chance to not be too extra because he's letting his other cats shine on the crew. You know what I'm saying? Like there's even like a passing of one of the crew members that they kind of like talk about a lot, Kato. And I feel like he's kind of like the memory, the Thug Life, like
How long will they mourn me?
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like he's
Yeah.
the member that's not there, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's a nice time in rap history, I think.
And that's that Nate Dogg too. I wish it would have been another. You feel that song? How long will they mourn? You know, like just it goes with it, and that's kind of like how you said, like is that like that Tupac and the like members, and then Nate Dogg, where like he could like blend in, like and then sing like on that song, and it still be a hit. Like it's like it's definitely memorable.
100%. Novak, did you want to close us out?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as mentioned before, Dave, man, definitely thank you for coming on the show. Yeah, Tupac, man, changed hip hop forever. You know, it's always sad sometimes to listen to the music, but you
It's
get into it and you go, man, what could it have been like? You know, what if you got that Biggie and Pac album? What if you got a Nas and Pac moment trading bars? Because remember, me and my girlfriend came from I Gave You Power. So that's the crazy thing about it, you know, and me and my girlfriend, I first heard it, I'm like, I know where this came from because Nas and him basically they had a unbeknownst like rivalry, which I think it should have stayed a rivalry, but it turned to something else. But yeah, just want to thank you for coming on the show. Awesome experience, Dave. Appreciate your thoughts on this. Definitely. I want to do a comparison show with you where we bring Biggie into this comparison and really close out the world of why they need each other in order to be successful in this universe. These guys ships basically definitely hitched each other. No matter how much they didn't like each other at the end, they both need each other to be great at this point. Just want to say thank you for coming on. Tupac, great, one of the greatest of all time. You can pretty much Jay, you can check us out any and everywhere podcasts are available. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for listening this afternoon today. And definitely go out there and listen to Thug Life. Let us know what you think.
definitely.